name of God, most gracious, most merciful, you are welcome to this afternoon session. For today, we will be talking about the collapse of the state and the rise of extra-state armed groups. The main question that we're going to tackle now is, if we're talking about Yemen, is there a state that we can call state scientifically that is moving forward towards the collapse? And do we have a state with institutions that lead the Yemeni society to the better? Do we know of any state that is capable of reaching the harmony between the society of Yemen? Or we have other actors, the extra-state armed group, the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. And in this context, we will be talking about this topic with Mr. Hasan Johar, the collapse of the state and the rise of extra-state armed groups. We have Dr. Hasan Johar, the dismantling of the state and the rise of the militia. Nabil Al Bukairi, Al-Qaeda and the domestic dynamics of the conflict in Yemen. Abdulnasser Al-Muwadea, the aims and future outcomes of the Houthis' plans for Yemen. And Mr. Omar Abdulaziz will give us a historical overview about Yemen. The floor is now open for Dr. Hasan Johar from Kuwait. Dr. Hasan Johar is a scholar who specializes is a Kuwaiti academic and the head of the Department of Political Science at Kuwait University. He earned a PhD in International Relations at Florida State University in 1988 and is the author of several research papers covering Gulf security, energy policy, and political Islam. Johar was elected to Kuwait's National Assembly and served as a parliamentarian from 1996 to 2011. You have 15 minutes, sir. The floor is yours. In the name of God, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank each and every one of you at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for allowing us to tackle this key event, this very important and dangerous event, and when it comes to the impact and the expectations regarding the future prospects in Yemen based on the decisive storm. First and foremost, although I do not pretend being specialized in the Yemeni affairs as an expert in the Gulf, I think that I need to remind us all and remind myself a little bit about the history, or like a historical overview, in order to get like a scientific understanding of the events that are currently taking place. First of all, they always say that Yemen cannot accept any foreign intervention, and the Yemeni state in general, throughout history, nobody could invade it and occupy it. It might be true, and it might be a source of pride for Yemenis. However, according to the overview of the history, all the events that took place in the past, since the Ottoman Empire till nowadays, there has been foreign interventions in Yemen, and with future repercussions, whether we are talking about the Ottoman intervention or the Soviet Union, the days of the south of Yemen, or the Egyptian intervention in the 60s, and it will be the same based on the actual data that we have when it comes to the Iranian influence in Yemen, or the new intervention through the decisive storm, and we will be talking about this later. The second fact is that the Yemeni society, as Mr. Chairman said, it's a country of tribes, a tribal society. The tribes rule, the tribes manage the country. More than 85% of the Yemeni society is based on tribes, and they are in charge, they are in control through the presence of an armed force or several armed forces that have been competing to rule the territories. Some tribes seek to rule other territories by expansion plans and having more control. Of course, these tribes' opinions might change through with the change of the leaders, and even the political ideologies, whether we're talking about the old ones or the new ones, whether we're talking about the nationalistic from Abdulnasser's day, or we are talking about religious ideologies, or we are talking about socialism. These ideologies have not been used to build a political culture in Yemen or to contribute directly and naturally and gradually to set the pillars of a state, an institutional state, including the institution of the military or the army. Although the military in most of Arab countries, especially in key Arab countries like Egypt, Syria, Iraq, the armies have been built on ideologies. There is a strong ideology for the army. It is a strong ideology from the leadership, from the commandment to the smallest soldier. Although the Yemeni army is a big army, and although it has been classified as the fifth biggest army in the region, however, unfortunately, it has been divided into tribes, and it has been into conflicts, competing with other tribes, and with the change of allegiance from one side to the other. For example, we have the army of Mudaffar, the defensive army, the national army, the guardians of the republic, and they have not a single ideology, and they are in constant change, and we always see that the leadership of the military or these military institutions are related to the names of the sheikhs of the tribes and their relatives. So the loyalty or the allegiance is not to the institution but to the leaders of the tribes. The third point is, unfortunately, the structure of the state of Yemen. I am a Gulf citizen. Yemen is a neighboring country. So throughout history, Yemen was a weak state, a vulnerable state, and we can see that clearly throughout the history. And recently, during the rule of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, the state was built upon one man's rule, with having strategic alliances or tactical alliances, guaranteeing the ruler to remain in power. Throughout history, we have seen that any Yemeni president who attempted to set the foundation, lay the foundation of a government, a strong military, centralized power with an identity, unified Yemeni identity, this president would be assassinated or would be ousted, starting with Abdullah Salam. And we can see today what's happening. Although most of the Yemeni presidents were former military people. And here we can raise a question. For example, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, 40 years as a military leader and state leader. However, in Yemen, not a single president could do the same, although they come from the military, maybe because the military is divided and does not enjoy a unified identity. Ali Abdullah Saleh, throughout his rule, or the period of 30 years, had alliances with tribes within Yemen, and the longest alliance was with the Reform Party in Yemen, and they were against the Houthis, although today we see them fighting together against the other regional parties. So we see that the militias or the armed groups in Yemen based on tribes are the core of the country, and the state is vulnerable. It is the key to achieving personal interests of the tribes. Therefore, we see that in Yemen, not only the military is divided into tribes, however, we can see that even the interests in Yemen, they have two sources of income: the oil of the south and the seaports from Aden to Marib. However, we can see that officials in charge of these ports are either military people or relatives, siblings, from different tribes, pledge allegiance to some militias, and there's always competing conflicts. And even throughout history, we have seen conflicts between the north and the south, and mainly it was because of which tribe had control over the source or the resources of the country, and the people of Yemen, of course, were not benefiting from these national interests. Therefore, since the state is marginalized, we can see that foreign interventions and national or local alliances are in constant change based on the common grounds and the contradictory interests. Sometimes we have the decisive storm decided by the GCC, except for Oman. In addition to some Arab countries, we can see that the decisive storm, the operation targeted a tribe in Yemen or a part of the tribe in Yemen, the Houthis, where the Houthis had strong ties even with Gulf countries, including Qatar and Saudi Arabia in particular, against other parties who are today on the opposite side. For example, Qataris intervened twice during the war between the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh, and they could cease fire, and we can see that Al-Islah, the Reform Party, was among the religious and political parties who had a strong tribal influence. They were the allies of KSA for long periods of time. Now we can see that it has all changed as a result. And if I have time, I will be talking more about this point. Even the Houthis were in Riyadh during the rule of late Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, the king of Saudi Arabia. However, things changed suddenly. So, why these tribes are in these conflicts? Doing away with the identity of the state and the structure of the state. As I have said, the economic interests, oil companies mainly, and controlling the seaports, of course, they have big incomes distributed on the tribes. Therefore, Yemen was classified as one of the biggest corrupt countries. Administrative corruption was thriving in Yemen during the rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh, former president, and it was among the repercussions or what led to the Arab Spring in Yemen 2010. Similarly to other revolutions in other Arab countries, we have seen or we can see that it has been led by the youth, the young people who want to secure their future. We can see that these revolutions were, so to speak, kidnapped, and religious parties controlled these revolutions, or there was like a backdoor for the previous regime to come back to the scene, and we can see what's happening in Yemen. The GCC initiative, whether inadvertently or on purpose, has contributed to getting Ali Abdullah Saleh back to the scene again in Yemen. The initiative of the GCC for Ali Abdullah Saleh had the immunity, and nobody could touch him or his money and assets, whether in country or outside. And now he is back in the country to play a military / political role, and he did away with the remaining articles of the GCC initiatives. Do you know that one of the main articles in the GCC initiative was about the formation of a government within 2 weeks, and a president had to be elected within 90 days, and within 1 year a new constitution was subject to should have been voted. However, none of these articles were implemented, and we have seen once again competitions between different tribes, and who was in charge of the weapons or through the weapons, and a new cycle of violence. Now, even through the decisive storm, we're back to square one, which is restoring the internal balance in order to kickstart the dialogue. Of course, it is a very expensive operation, politically, security-wise, regionally, and we're back to square one, to the initiative of the GCC that was backed by the UN through the last Security Council resolution. So there is a lack of political will to implement the initiative. The structure of Yemen that is based on tribes might have played a major role in that. Therefore, the size of storm was to restore the balance, and it was an attempt by the GCC countries to strike the increasing power of the Houthis, supported by Ali Abdullah Saleh, through the 4 objectives: protecting legitimacy and the withdrawal of the Houthis, doing away with weapons, and halting the danger or the threat against Saudi Arabia. 1 month later, we see no change in the situation on the ground, and this leads us to a new point. At least we can say that the decisive storm has achieved 2 objectives. First of all, stopping the direct threat against the Saudi territories. It is an achievement. And the second point is, even if we talk about legitimacy today, we can see that Mr. Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi is outside. He is still representing the presidency in Yemen, and the military strength of the Houthis was reduced The vision should change, in my opinion, and very quickly, in order to avoid having a long-term war. The decisive storm had objectives, however, it had no clear strategic vision in order to dot the I's. Although the military wars throughout the world agreed that we cannot win a war by airstrikes, it was or the Israeli war against the Arabs in 1967 was the only war to be won by airstrikes one night, and 6 days later Israel invaded Arab countries. However, we have never seen any war achieved or accomplished by airstrikes. So, airstrikes complicate things more on the ground, and you cannot win the war. Through the decisive storm, the GCC countries lost the bet on other countries. They had relied on a scenario with the intervention from Egypt and Pakistan by land forces. Pakistan did not take part in the war. Egypt is trying to reach a political solution. Of course, for GCC countries to launch military strike on the ground, it is hard. The second point is that supporting the tribes that are against the Houthis, and this might lead the GCC countries to more trouble. The three main military components or militias are the Houthis and Abdullah Saleh, the Reform Party, Al-Islah Party, representing the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And some people today have talked about supporting these tribes in order to finish the war on the ground. One, the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, supporting the Muslim Brotherhood would put an end to the alliance between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, because if Saudi Arabia decides to support the Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen, it will not please the Egyptians. Supporting Al-Qaeda is even more dangerous because there's the so-known the Islamic State in the Arabian Peninsula might be one of the strongest threats in the future. In Mosul, when the Islamic State was announced, we have seen on the internet new maps that included Kuwait, and so we can see the threat against Saudi Arabia in the south. So supporting some tribes against the Houthis is not an option because these tribes are not in line with the future strategies of GCC countries led by Saudi Arabia. Therefore, in my opinion, the solution is the GCC initiative, the decision of the Security Council of the United Nations, and the dialogue imposed by GCC countries is better for everybody. Of course, dialogue might be subject to problems at the regional and international levels. In my opinion, the dialogue should include everyone. Although under Chapter 7, the UN Security Council called upon different parties to dialogue, and maybe this dialogue can take place in Muscat or in Kuwait, for example, because they have good mediation, have good offices, and they have had very accomplishments when it comes to good deeds between Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman and UAE. So Kuwait might be acceptable by different parties in Yemen, and therefore it might be to restore the whole based on this dialogue with no conditions between the Yemenis to determine their future in order to have a better future. Of course, we cannot guarantee anything. However, it will definitely be better than the war of attrition and the continuation of this war. The longer the war, the more complicated the things will be, and internal wars will continue, and maybe regional conflicts might start. We cannot forget the Iranian role, even the international position. The United States has a very weak foreign policy today, and the rising power is Russia internationally, and Russia is not with the GCC countries at several levels, including in Yemen. Thus, we hope that the voice of reason, dialogue, mediation between the Yemenis will reign, and under the umbrella of GCC countries that are concerned about the security and peace in Yemen. Thank you. I would like to thank Dr. Hasan Johar. Dialogue is the most important thing. The international countries, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al Qaeda, the foreign intervention from Turkey, Egypt, France, Saudi Arabia, US, the tribes and their allegiance, the ideology of the military, the relationship between the Houthi and other countries, the initiative of the GCC that has given some power to Ali Abdullah Saleh and some immunity, and we can see him playing this role today. We move to Mr. Mahmoud Abdulaziz, or Abdulaziz. He is in charge of the Ministry of Culture. He's got the floor for 15 minutes, please. Thank you, Doctor. I would like to talk about the new plan. We have a lot of questions regarding the situation. Today, we need some wisdom. We need to tackle the real objectives behind what's happening in Yemen and in several Arab countries. Of course, we need to study the culture, political culture in the Arab world that is keeping us in this conflict. It is a series of events that have not changed throughout the decades, and we can see in Yemen that today we can see that there is a mediation and reform in Yemen. The Shafa'id and the Yazidi, Sulaymaniya, the Salihiyya, we can find that these two major schools were moderate when it comes to the explanation of the Holy Quran. We would not like to enter into details. The biggest imams led to some common grounds, maybe when it comes to the ideology and when it comes to a lot of ideas about the doctrine. What I mean was that there was a religious reform. However, there were no political reforms in parallel with this religious reform. I would like to strike like a comparison between Europe and the Arab world. We can see that the 12th, 13th, and 14th century there was a reform of the church, and it was in parallel with the political reform with Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the social structure. If we study the secular movement in Europe, it is not only about the separation between what's religious and what's state. We have more common ground, we have more participation, we have more freedom. This did not take place in the Arab world and did not take place in Yemen. We can see that all imams following the Yazidi historically, they were in conflict politically, and they were all in violation of the principles of the Yazidiyya. Every imam used to say that he is the imam in charge of these people, and if we study the historical struggle or historical conflict, we can find that it is strongly political. We can see today the situation in Yemen reflecting an impasse. The political elite is facing this impasse based on the historical problems, and it is being reborn. So the past is present because, of course, the past there has been different structures, and we refuse the future because we are trying to fix the problems using ways that are no longer available. We can see autocratic regimes and Arab Republican regimes. The Arab doctrine or ideology is autocratic mainly. So we need a reform that would allow for a participation and common grounds politically. We can see this in Yemen. The political elite, even if they have some ideology when it comes to the south and some nationalistic parties in the south and the north, and when it comes to religious parties, different parties, we can see that the culture that was inherited is still hampering the efforts of the political elite, and it is going between the pragmatic needs, making these political elite based on the negative past and not the natural past, and being active when it comes to strategies for the future. So this is why we have seen this negative impact. There is this conflict between the state and the elite and the society on the other hand. So when we are talking about the institutional aspect in the state of Yemen, led by Ali Abdullah Saleh for 3 decades, we will find that the state was only about allegiance, rule. It used to threaten based on the unified decision maker and the centralized power. In Yemen, we are surprised to see this amount of weapons and traps. We can see a lot of camps and weaponry, and these extra state armed groups that are a variety of groups in a poor country. 80 or 90% of the country's resources were spent these things. Why? In order to protect the cities and to not to respect the law of the history. And this is why I think that there is no coincidence when it comes to history. The Arab Spring was no coincidence. Today's decisive storm was no coincidence. these ideas were there, and now they are under the light.
Yemen was in this kind of engagement with itself and with the other historically. This is a complex social, political, and economic situation. We have to understand where is this dilemma come from. The social cohesion is distorted now, and what we used to call the traditional tribal society this has been distorted because of its negative engagement with the so-called state. I say so-called because it carries the name of the state, but it does not behave in the spirit of a state. It has no institutions as such as a state, and for this reason the intelligentsia was distorted, the tribal system was distorted, all the approaches towards what was happening in the country, the Arab order, which is more corrupt and more folkloric, distorted all of this. So we ask here, what's the role of the people? I think this is a historical question. We cannot judge history by epistemological and logical answers and really think everything is due to a mere coincidence. This is what history taught us, and I think there is enough introductory reasons to understand and expect a reconciliation in Yemen and to put an end to this war machine, this really situation which is producing its own warlords, like what happened in the Lebanon in the civil war. Even if they wrap themselves with silhouettes of beauties or beautiful things to beautify their positions, they were nothing than warlords. The unarmed, innocent people in peace-loving cities like Aden and Taz, and now these forces, these backward forces are pouring their fire, the fire of hatred, backwardness, illiteracy against peaceful, loving people. This is not a coincidence, and it's not a coincidence that this war now is being advertised in a Mongolian way, similar to what the Mongols did centuries ago. This kind of beautification of this civil war will only lead to further discord in society and further destruction of the national fabric of Qatar. What will happen after this storm? I have no answer really. I don't think this storm was born out of mere coincidence. It is governed by the laws of history, which have no room for coincidences and chance, but deep causal relationships. I think we are in need of another kind of reading or analysis based on careful consideration, deliberate understanding, in the hope of reaching a new vision, a new conceptualization which will lead us to extract Yemen as a country and really avoid a situation whereby millions of Iraqis, Syrians, and before that Lebanese and Somalis have paid for with their blood, and to break this cycle of despotism which has been broken everywhere else in the world but the Arab world. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Omar Abdulaziz. The Imams in Yemen used to fight politically, although they all of them belonged to one faction, which is Zaydism. It's no coincidence that the tribe has been distorted, the tribal system and others. And the question we are posing here is, what will happen after the current decisive storm? We now turn our attention to Dr. Al Bukairi. You have 15 minutes. May the blessings of Allah be upon you all. I think the subject I was asked to talk about it is really what is both absent and present in the Yemeni situation, and that is the question of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, and which we have been talking about for a long time now, but in fact it was rather superficial, more or less, and eventually we Yemenis have paid a heavy price for the way Al-Qaeda was dealt with in the media. In other words, what I'm saying should not necessarily amount to what Al-Qaeda is all about, but there is at least some sort of oversimplification of the Al-Qaeda. When you, for example, nowadays, whenever you Google the word Al-Qaeda, you hear Al-Yemen and vice versa. And this kind of confusing the two issues probably goes back to the fact that Osama bin Laden's origins go back to Yemen. I was once in the United States. I met someone on a plane, and the person talking to me asked me, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Yemen." So that person said, "Oh, you are from the country of Osama bin Laden." So hence the relationship. I'm not denying the fact that Al-Qaeda as an idea began to gain some flesh in 1989 by the likes of Osama bin Laden, and a group surrounding him were by and large Yemeni and Saudi. But the term Al-Qaeda was purely an American intelligence name. The documents found reveal that, and the Western media started referring to this group, which is affiliated to Osama bin Laden, as Al-Qaeda. And of course there were many books written and articles published. Abu Mus'ab al-Suri, Mustafa Maryam, in his famous book The International Islamic Resistance, which reveals a Yemeni role in defending Muslim holy shrines. And this book is an essential reference book to understand Al-Qaeda. Abu Mus'ab al-Suri's book, when he talked about Yemen as the most suitable place for Al-Qaeda to start and spread to other areas. So therefore, Al-Qaeda found a fertile ground in Yemen, and amongst the chief objectives of Al-Qaeda is to fight the Socialist Party. And they used to say that we'll know no survivor if the Socialist Party survived, and also the Yemeni Socialist Party and the political allies who fought over the state without anybody providing a clear vision of what the state is all about. And in the summer of 1994 took a military turn, and Ali Abdullah Saleh allied himself with Al-Qaeda, and they fought the Socialist Party, and then Yemen was unified by military force. Al-Qaeda had real leaders at the time. One of them was named Muslim Barasain. He was amongst the most dangerous military commanders of Al-Qaeda in that period. He was liquidated by the Yemeni intelligence services because they thought he is the commander and the mastermind behind many military operations against the Socialist Party in Yemen. Then came the second phase when the International Islamic Front for fighting the Crusaders and the Jews was formed in November 1992, and after the liquidation of Muslim Barasin, most of Al-Qaeda's people left Yemen, but they came back, and then Abdulaziz Al-Sharif, who was a famous author and ideologue of Al-Qaeda, came back to Yemen. He is a physician by training. He lived in Yemen with a large number of retainees from Afghanistan, and they were the authorities clamped down on them. They arrested some were extradited to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and even the United States and France. In that period, Al-Qaeda had Hasan al-Muwadea, who kidnapped 16 American tourists in 1997 and took them to a remote area in Abyei. And then the negotiations failed, and the place was stormed by the military. 4 of the hostages were killed, and Hasan al-Muwadea was killed, and 2 years later, or in fact he was captured, and 2 years later received a death sentence in Sana'a. And therefore, the real leaders of Al-Qaeda, like Abu Ali al-Harithi, who was killed by an American drone in the Marib Desert in 2001, I think this was the first phase of leaders of Al-Qaeda who were linked to Osama bin Laden. The second phase was when Al-Qaeda was utilized in the regional so-called war on terrorism and exploited by Ali Abdullah Saleh regime, and new leaders appeared, and an article in Al-Arabi Al-Jadid today reveals the name of a famous Al-Qaeda leader, and he used to say that there is no alternative to Al-Qaeda but Al-Qaeda, and they were talking about taking control over Marib or something, and within 2-3 years, last 2-3 years, Al-Qaeda was present in these governorates. Abyei fell into their hands, Shabwa also, and Abdulnasser Al-Marwani, a current Houthi leader, was the person who completely surrendered Abyei governorate to Al-Qaeda before, and he gave them all the army barracks and weapons and ammunition dumps. Now he has appointed a leader in the Houthi regime. So therefore, the complexity of the situation really, which is part and parcel of the Yemeni society by and large, we see what we saw last year when the military command number one in Al Mukalla and others, this was part and parcel of the power struggle between the different wings within the military establishment, and those who were loyal to Ali Abdullah Saleh used to peacefully hand over their camps and their military headquarters to the Houthis as part of a larger political scheme. But ultimately, I think Al Qaeda now is not a major player in the events in Yemen. It is of a secondary role or importance, and as a player between the different centers of power, it occupies a secondary importance, and it benefits from the absence of the state. And Al Qaeda as an organization, and this is according to what their ideologues have written, they always work for states to fail, because only then Al Qaeda can move freely. And of course, there are new leaders who appear on the scene now, like Khalid Batar, who was set free from prison in Hadramaut recently, and we have others who committed crimes against military personnel because of suspicion of belonging to Houthis about a year ago. Now we see that now there are reports being leaked that some leaders of Al Qaeda met Ali Abdullah Saleh and his Minister of Defense when he was in power. Now, some of Al Qaeda's activities are in fact done openly, and they try to portray the Yemeni society as a time bomb and wreak havoc and destruction in society, and fight the Shiites. For example, I ask now, where is Al Qaeda today when it comes to fighting the Houthis in Shabwa, which is a bastion of Al Qaeda? And it's said that this was a stronghold of Al Qaeda. It was handed over to Houthis before Lahaj governor had fallen into the hands of Houthis. The day before, it fell into the hands of Al Qaeda, and the following day, it was handed over to Al Houthis. So we cannot say for sure that Al Qaeda is a major player, but it's a problem nonetheless we have to pay attention to, and that is Al Qaeda has been blown out of proportion. This doesn't amount to denying their existence. Of course, their presence is real, but we should not attach to them importance more than what they deserve.
Thank you. Mr. Nabil specializes in the scholar who specializes in Islamist movements and international strategies. He is the chief of Arab Forums for Studies in Sana'a and the editor-in-chief of Muqarabat. He talks with Dr. Abdulnasser Al-Muwadea, and he focuses on the Yemeni affairs, and he's a political analyst and advisor and a trainer on a variety of topics such as election campaigns, political participation, negotiation, and the electoral system. Mr. Abdulnasser will be talking about the objectives of the Houthi project in Yemen and the future outcomes. Thank you, sir. So the paper's title is The Future Outcomes of the Houthis' Plans for Yemen. Of course, foreseeing the future in an ever-changing world is a big venture because it is very hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. There are several scenarios. Some of these scenarios might be more plausible, but they are all assumptions, or sometimes we cannot see any of them implemented. Therefore, I will be talking in my paper about a number of scenarios for the future of the Houthi movement. The first scenario is ruling and expanding. The Houthi movement might be able to rule main parts of Yemen. The conditions for the success of this scenario is the political and military capacity and the skyrocketing increase of the power of this movement in a very short period of time. It has made this movement capable of being a strong actor, and it is playing a major role at the level of the politics. It is using the heritage of the Zaydi rule of 1,000 years, and it is benefiting from the political conflict between the political elite, and it is using this conflict in an excellent way so far. It has militias and people who are ready to die, to give their lives for this movement. And maybe Al Qaeda are the only ones who can compete at this level, and this is why it is very energetic, and they have young leadership when it comes to the comparison, or if we compare them with the other older leaders, political leaders on the other side. So they have a lot of advantages that we can that support them to rule the Yemen. The second point is that the Houthi movement has become stronger than the state and the state institutions, and they use the state institutions like the military and the security institutions. And the second point is the weak of the opponents. The opposing parties in the past were Ali Abdullah Saleh and Mohsen al-Rahman and the Sheikh of Hashid and the Reform al-Islah. There's an alliance with Ali Abdullah Saleh. There was a strike against Sheikh Al-Ahmar and his sons, and the Reform Party was weakened. So these factors have led to the rule, or to portraying the Houthi movement as the only actor capable of acting. Other parties react. The weakening state and the weak state institutions are also parts of the scenario that is the Houthis might rule. And there's also a regional aspect, which is the growing Iranian role and in the region that is capable of using the Houthi movement, and that is using during the decisive storm this movement in an excellent way. When it comes to the scenarios of failure, it is about the core of this Houthi movement and its project. And at its core, the movement is only about power for certain family and lineage. And we are talking about the family of the Houthis or the Hashemite, bigger family that is only a small proportion of the Yemeni society. The ideas are back to medieval centuries, and the behavior is a behavior of a militia. It is a violent militia, and also they have non-individualistic ideas. So it is a project for chaos in Yemen. It's not a project for ruling Yemen. It is capable of creating several of enemies, chaos, but it cannot rule because such a project cannot get the support of a lot of Yemeni people to back this project and to pledge allegiance to this project or movement. The second part is the demographic representation of this movement is very weak. People who are benefiting are a very weak proportion of the Hashemites. So the ones that can benefit, not even all of them, the ones that can benefit from the Houthi movement. So they are all following part of the Zaydi denomination. Maybe 10-15% tops. The fourth point, limiting the capacity of the Houthis to rule, the poverty of Yemen. Yemen is a poor country, very weak resources of oil and gas, based on the chaos created by the Houthis, like we see. A lot of resources will no longer be available because foreign companies will not invest in Yemen. The help, the assistance comes from, the aid comes from Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia, and this help will no longer be available if should the Houthis rule. Of course, the Iranians cannot be as supportive as the Saudis or the GCC to Yemen. So it cannot be a copy of the rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh or any other autocratic regime. The overwhelming movements want the foreign support, foreign coverage, regional coverage and support in order to rule. But they, of course, they have very limited regional support because Iran is geographically far away from Yemen. So the Houthi project, Houthi plan, does not have real support that would allow this movement to rule. The spread of weapons and the landscape of Yemen, it is very hard to make people subject to your rule. It is very hard. The imams could not make them subject to their rule because it is a very tough landscape or territory. The refusal of the regional actors, of course, the decisive storm revealed this. The variety of denominations in Yemen. In the past, the majority was Sunni, and now most of the people are Sunnis. Most of the Zaydis converted into Sunni Islam by the Zaydis who were the rulers because they wanted to oust the Zaydis, the leaders and the Imams. They spread the Sunni ideology. The Zaydi rulers and the Zaydi leaders or the Yazidis were not persecuted. So the Houthis were pretending that they were persecuted. This is not true at all. They are in control, although they were a minority. They went against the Zaydi Imams that competed the Republican regime. The vulnerability of the Houthi victory. If we follow up on this matter, we can see that the Houthis were moving in a vacuum. They could not see any strong power against them. They were against Saleh before entering Sana'a, and President Hadi was with them. The left was with them as supporting them as a power capable of establishing balance. President Hadi was with them. Jabal bin Omar was convinced that they will be the counterbalance against Ali Abdullah Saleh, and all of these elements paved the way for the Houthi. The Islah, the reform, did not take part strongly in the operation. He said, I am a political party, I'm not a militia. The country, the government is in charge of facing the Houthis, and I might support them. However, I will not be against them on the ground. And it happened on the day of the invasion of Sana'a. They withdrew from the operation. They had recruited or mobilized 40,000 to 50,000 soldiers in Sana'a against the Houthis. When they saw that President Hadi was not gonna help them, and he was with the Houthis against them, they withdrew, and the Houthis entered Sana'a without any resistance. There used to be two military men, and they used to surrender. 20,000 soldiers and two divisions were in charge of entering and exiting the central security headquarters. It meant that the Houthis had a very easy victory. Therefore, the opposing parties are still strong. The vulnerability of this victory means that they don't have strong grounds upon which they can build. They have also been based in their approach on the alliances with the tribes, and of course the tribes might change against them in the future if the circumstances change. So the Houthis are weak if they have a strong opponent. However, so far there is no strong opponent, and this is why the Houthis are benefiting today. The other scenario is transforming this movement into a political party. The strength of this scenario might be achieved if a new leadership might reach the higher position in the movement. If this leadership changes, also if there's a change in the region, maybe the lack of Iranian support, for example, the movement might reconsider their performance, and all of these issues will lead to this scenario. The failure of the scenario is we can talk about the violent conflict, the vulnerability of the central power, the capacity of the movement to have like a strong military capacities. The third scenario is the end of the Houthi movement. It will not be achieved unless the opponents are capable of achieving a strong victory that would put the Houthi movement to an end, and maybe like from within a movement might be against the current movement, or a strong government, central government, capable of containing politically and militarily this movement, or the lack of foreign support. The failure elements of this scenario is that they will be capable of facing these pressures. The foreign support, the chaos in Yemen makes them active as much as possible. The fourth scenario, or the fifth actually scenario, is the rebel militia. It might be the most pragmatic or realistic scenario. The Houthis are not going to be able to rule, and it will not come to an end. It will remain as a rebel militia, ruling some territory, expanding here and there, withdrawing from this city or that. So this is the most realistic scenario, taking into account the actual circumstances that might change, of course. All of this allows us to say that since this is the most realistic option, decision makers should be ready to deal with permanent militia. It is impossible for the Houthi movement to become political party. People who say so do not know about the history of the Houthis. The rule of the Houthis of Yemen cannot be possible. Therefore, we should deal with Houthis as a rebel movement of rebellion, and there will be no surprises. And we need to deal with this movement with more knowledge when it comes to its role and the situation in Yemen. The situation in Yemen, the Houthi movement cannot be contained completely, but through the State of Yemen project. What is currently happening is that there is a sectarian instigation or sectarian mobilization, and here you are working on a weak point. There's the Houthi and there is a reformist within the same family. There is a Salafi and a Mu'tamari in the same family. So there is no clear lines between Shias, Sunnis, Zaydis, etc. So we cannot rely on the sectarian divide. And when it comes to the tribes, the north, the south will be in favor of the Houthis because they would be representatives of the Yazidi that has the biggest reserve of fighters, and nobody would be able to oust this movement but them. Now we are talking about marginal areas, rural areas. Historically, nobody could win in Sana'a from the south, the current south, or the north or the west. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abdulnasser. The Houthi movement benefited from the political conflict. They have young minds. They had alliance with Ali Abdullah Saleh and formed a military power. The weakening state benefited them, and the support of Iran also benefited them when it comes to training, mobilizing, and organizing. It has violence, a behavior of violence. The project is chaos. There is a regional refusal of the Houthi rule. This movement is formed by a number of conflicting tribes. A strong military strike might put them to an end, or stopping the foreign support. We have come to an end when it comes to the panelists' paper. Participants have 3 minutes, not more, to express their questions. The floor is yours, Dr. Jaber. I have a quick question, Dr. Hasan. have seen what happened at the Assembly of the Nation and some rallies in Bahrain. What are the different aspects of this conflict? There are some parties investing in this sectarian conflict. Sometimes we are seeing this divide between Sunnis, Shias, and it is being covered by the media, the press. How can we face this danger, this threat? I have been listening to the panels and most of the analysts and the journalists. They have been talking about the Houthis and the political solution. I would like to tell you, I am a Bedouin. I don't understand a lot in politics. However, any solution or any dialogue with Ali Abdullah Saleh and Abdul Malik Al-Houthi, their assistants, any stopping of the war, if the war does not end with putting an end to your enemy, he will strike again. So any political dialogue is not good. Some people are giving advices to strike, to use airstrikes without going to the floor. It's like dancing without moving the hips. So we cannot do it. I'm telling you the reality. I have talked to a lot of Houthis. I know how they think. The dialogue, they don't believe in dialogue. They dialogue with themselves. Their solutions is for them, not for the people. We have dialogued with them 10 months. We have agreed on some certain points. Tomorrow they will come and say no. So Abdul Malik Al-Houthi, they believe in him. He is their absolute leader. They used to talk about Jannah, they used to talk about the ship, and they wanted to go to Yemen, and they are waiting the mermaids and they're waiting the virgins. So they have their own system of beliefs, and any solution that does not involve putting an end to this movement, it's not like a pool game, it's not like a billiard. So there's a lot of minds. They are burying my brother now. If we do not intervene, if the GCC countries do not intervene and fight in Marad and Sana'a, they will be fighting in the future here, not in Doha, and all over the Arab country. We can fight them now in specific areas. Thank you. Thank you. So the speaker has lost a lot of his relatives, and one of the martyrs was his brother, Dr. Salahi. Thank you. Thank you for the panelists. Once again, I would like to say that throughout the 50 years, the situation in Yemen has been international. Even Al-Qaeda, it is made in U.S. product. It's a made in U.S. product. Even ISIS is made in U.S. It is being used by the U.S. and the friends of the U.S. There were Ali Abdullah Saleh. I used to threaten either me or the extremists. This Gulf, to which we belong geographically, we should make this dialogue faster in order to create a new idea to restore the state and the government, because we have a conflict that is political between parties about the idea of the state, the resources, to a sectarian and the denomination conflict. The Zaydi Imams, we had no problem with them. whether we are talking about the Hakimiyya in the past, most of the Hashemites in the past were against the Imamis in the 60s. So we have no problem with the Imamis as an idea, even they wanted to be a Fatimid Imam, because we cannot, or Yemen cannot be ruled by one party. We have nationalistic experience, socialist experience. We want a strong state for the future. I have listened to the interventions since the very beginning. I think that one intervention that did not use the tribe, the militia, the denominations. My question for the Yemenis: do you have peasants? Do you have workers? Do you have merchants? Do you have industrialists? Do you have feminist movements? Do you have unemployed people? Do you have youth associations? Do you have other frameworks for the civilization? Why do you talk always about these three topics only? You do away with a rich society. Why don't you give different lectures about different topics that would reflect the real image? Who is the Houthi? Is he one individual? There's a history for the idea. Does it have like some common ground with the others? Is he against the others? So this is at the service of the political operation in Yemen. Sir. In the name of God, I think everybody is confused now. Some people do not understand how the Houthis are fighting with Ali Abdullah Saleh, and it is a confusing situation. And I think that Ali Abdullah Saleh's success was to distance himself from the conflict. Ali Abdullah Saleh used to say it's a time bomb. Yemen is a time bomb, and he used to talk about himself as a time bomb. It was manufactured by the nationalists, by the Gulf, and by the Americans. Everybody wants to dismantle this bomb, but everybody is afraid to be targeted by this bomb, or that this bomb might explode between his hands. Now we are talking about the Houthis, while the Houthis are one of Ali Abdullah Saleh's tools. Ali Abdullah Saleh has created several tools in order to extort. In the 90s, when he supported Saddam Hussein, and he was sanctioned by the Gulf countries, and the 94 the Gulf wanted to support the separation. Ali Abdullah Saleh felt that he had to create or to build a new relationship other than his relationship with the Gulf countries. This is why he started to build bridges with Iran. The Houthi is not the man of Iran, but Ali Abdullah Saleh is. Ali Abdullah Saleh could not execute or could not go public about this relationship because he would lose the Gulf financing. Therefore, I can say that it is a counter-revolution now in Yemen, like what happened in Egypt. However, today it is according to the Yemeni way. Kushari is a national dish in Yemen, and Salta is the national dish in Yemen. In Egypt, there were no weapons between among the people. Houthis in Yemen are an armed group, are doing this counter-revolution in the society. Gulf countries, should they want to put an end to this conflict, when the battle was in Damaj, I said that the fall of Sana'a starts in Damaj. The fall of Doha, not only Riyadh, starts with the fall of Sana'a. Ali Abdullah Saleh wants to remain in power. This is his objective. He wanted his son to be back. Revenge was not his only objective. So he is using the situation in order to limit the effect of the influence of the Houthi, and it is a repetition of the past that led the Houthi to Sana'a, and remaining or using the same methods will lead Iran to the country. Thank you.
In the name of God, of course, all the papers are concerned with the situation of Yemen, but they cannot really feel the suffering of what Yemenis are feeling. And I propose that we suggest some solutions. Of course, we are not decision makers, but we can at least suggest them. There are some logical things that everybody can think of, not necessarily decision makers at the highest level. Like, for example, the continued presence of the Yemeni government in Riyadh will weaken everybody inside. Why can't the alliance, in cooperation with the Yemeni government in Riyadh, to find some logical solutions, like, for example, to appoint a prime minister from those who remain inside the country? This, of course, will send a comforting message for those inside. When we talk about government, this government is not there, it's absent. This is not good. Secondly, the youth who created the revolution of 2011 are there and they are capable of managing the crises of the country. At least we should have an e-government. This e-government can be run by this revolutionary youth in view of the political and constitutional vacuum inside the country. When we talk about the Yemeni people, I'm not talking about political freedom, and I'm talking about a life or death situation. I'm talking about people who are looking for water to drink, medicine to cure their. People are dying of thirst. For the last 9 days, there's been no electricity, and no electricity means no drinking water. There are some solutions that can be thought of by simple people on the ground, and such people can strengthen the hand of people on the ground. And if you allow me, I have one more comment. The Houthis, as a bogeyman or a monster you created, or people in the media created. We talk about Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis and their hegemony, and we believe that there is some sort of a snowball which is gaining more size and weight and strength. These people are very simple people. They have no education at all. There's a group of Houthis who took control of a car which was carrying some equipment. Some charitable organizations, for example, were declared bankrupt, and this truck was loaded with some vacuum cleaners, and this is an example of their ignorance. My cousin was driving this vehicle when the Houthis saw this electric vacuum and said, there must be a ghost inside. They arrested my cousin. What my cousin did is he switched it on and let the dust come out of it, and they ran away. So imagine, can you really imagine this kind of people being able to run a country? There is 30 million Yemenis who are more than capable of running their own affairs, but they have. We don't want just conclusions and recommendations. We want to send a letter with all these demands to the leadership of the alliance. The lady there. I'll give priority to those who have not spoken before. They have the priority now. Please go ahead. Please allow me to أسأل بالإنجليزي. أنا لا أشعر بالارتياح. كنا هذا الصباح نتحدث عندما أشار أحدهم عن الحل. من المهم أن يكون حلا يستند إلى الأبعاد الاجتماعية والسياسية والاقتصادية لقوى المجتمع اليمني ككل. والآن نتحدث عن الحوثيين. نحن بحاجة إلى أن نفهم كيف استطاعوا حشد هذه الجموع. أصلا هم استطاعوا حشد هذه الجموع كحركة لأن هناك مظالم. إذا ما أردنا أن نمضي قدما إلى الأمام ونتحدث عن اندماج اقتصادي سياسي اجتماعي، أن نعود إلى جذور المشكلة والمظالم. هم لم يأتوا من فراغ ولم يصحوا ذات صباح ويقولوا دعونا نزحف على صنعاء. نعم، هم قاموا بأشياء سيئة منذ ذلك الوقت، لكنهم بدأوا بدايات لأن هناك تهميش ومظالم. إذن ربما نحن بحاجة إلى أن نضع أنفسنا في مكانهم ونحاول أن نفهم ما هي مشاعرهم ولماذا حشدوا هذه الجموع ومن أجل ماذا. Sheikh there, please. Thank you very much, Abdulrab Salami from An-Nahda movement in South Yemen. Abdulrab Salami, yes. When we talk, all our talk so far is about the Zaydi holy shrines or holy areas, if we can call it, if we're referring to the tribal aspect of it or the religious side of it. In fact, the tribal side has occupied a lot of our attention, but the Yemeni revolutions from 48 to 62 to 1990, then the unification, and 2011, all these landmarks could not manage to turn into a social revolution and change the power base. So therefore, what I want to say now, the solution is we should not rely on the religious aspect in all of this, but the civil society also. Now the popular resistance, the youth who do not belong to any political faction, because we're faced with two cultures in Yemen: the civil culture with which a state can be built, and a tribal one, and how we can find solutions through deposing Ali Abdullah Saleh. We must establish a state. I just want to say that we have our time has over. We finished at 6 o'clock now. We are almost 5:15. We want to take two more interventions. The lady there. Assalamu alaikum. Sukain Abdul Qadir. I'm from Malaysia. I study international relations. Any political solution should take into account two issues. First, the issue of the South. If the issue of the South is not dealt with the borders of 1990, we'll get nowhere. The second point is each party is trying to exclude the others. Al-Islah will want to destroy the country just to get rid of Al-Houthi. Al-Houthi wants to destroy the country just get rid of the Islah, and the National Congress is doing the same. If we carry on like this, we will get nowhere. Now the Houthis, regardless of their being Zaydis or not, we have to understand the culture of the tribal society as a society which suffered from. These people are prepared to send their 5-year-old children into battle and in the name of jihad. This is the real problem. The dialogue should be done through the ability to convince all other parties. What I suggest is, because Malaysia is a member of the Security Council and Mr. Mahathir Mohammed is a well-known international personality and in the Islamic world, and under the banner of the Islamic Cooperation Congress, can play a mediation role here, whether with the Houthis or the socialists or anybody. The question is, to what extent are the Gulf countries prepared to take up this suggestion? And if the dialogue does not involve Ali Abdullah Saleh, Abdul Malik Al-Houthi, Hamid Al-Ahmar, everybody under one roof, then the country will be faced with doom and destruction. I'm sorry, time is over, and they are telling me that finished, that your time is over. I give each panelist a few minutes each if they have any final thoughts. Mr. Omar Abdulaziz has apologized because he has traveling plans, and if you want to continue this dialogue, you can continue outside. Now, I give the floor now to Mr. Abdulnasser. 2 minutes, not more, please. I don't have anything to say. Thank you very much. Thank you for saving our time, Dr. Hasan. Dr. Jabir asked me a question directly, although the question is about Kuwait, but I'll try to place it in the general context. Kuwait is no different than the rest of the Arab and Muslim world, that there is a huge amount of sectarian tension, which is in nobody's interest, and through the social media and the statements attributed to members of parliament, everybody wants to really jump on this bandwagon, and although everybody knows that eventually this kind of positioning will weaken us all, and what problems we manage to solve, this kind of skepticism will have no cure, really. We spoke about different wars and different ills you can solve through sitting down to a negotiation table, but this kind of poisoned atmosphere knows no solution. And by the way, the question of Yemen was used, or the sectarian aspect was used to achieve political ends, and some militias inside Yemen and also regional and international powers and alliances and allegiances shift. But unfortunately, we see now in Yemen, we hear about the Shiites being called Rawafid, or Safavids. On the other side, we hear them being labeled as Wahhabis and Daesh or ISIL, etc. Unfortunately, we forget the fact that what the difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia is of political nature. I'm surprised by some well-known religious figures, although the official Saudi line says that this is a political conflict. The Imam of the holy shrines is referring to this as a sectarian or religious conflict. This kind of intellectual terrorism is very dangerous. So therefore, civil society can be or should be stored as the best alternative, really, to allow us to build countries and societies able to respect others.
My remark regarding the situation in Yemen when it comes to the decisive storm, the tactical trend of the Gulf countries was based on the simple reasons, talking about sectarian conflicts. I think that the crisis is deeper. There's a lot of complicated cultural problems, and we are seeing the result now. It is impossible to reduce what's happening in Yemen to sectarian divide only. It is cultural, societal, and when it comes to the Sunnis and the Shias, I think we would be serving the Iranian project when we talk about fighting the Shias. In our opinion, our brothers, the Arab Shias, might be easy used by Iran. When we say so, Iran is using the denominations of the Arab people in order to favor its own interests. Thank you all. We would like to thank the panelists. We're done.